In this video, we continue with our narration of William Walker Atkinson's Practical Mental Influence and Mental Fascination. In the preceding video, we narrated Chapter 6, Fascination, including mental fascination, personal magnetism, charming, irresistible influence, alluring qualities of the mind, instances of great men, the secret of fascination, examples, explanations, and instructions, and a valuable bit of information. We ended with, and now do you see how you have been affected by persons who have influenced you at times in your past life? Now that you know the secret, you'll be able to, in a measure, immune yourself from further impressions from others. And when you read our concluding chapter entitled Self-Protection, you'll be able to surround yourself with a protective armor through which the thought waves cannot penetrate, but which will turn aside the shafts directed towards you. Now, the current chapter, Chapter 7, Hypnotic Influence, includes the distinction between fascination and hypnotism, how hypnotic influence affects the person, the truth about hypnotism, general instruction of the subject with illustrative examples, and the directions for producing the phenomena. But before continuing, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, then please pause the video right now and do it. And at the same time, activate the notification bell feature. If by the end of this video you find that you like it, please give it a thumb up. Comment courteously below. Share the joy of the channel with others. And now continue. Chapter 7. Hypnotic Influence. As we have mentioned in the previous lesson, there is a general resemblance between the manifestation of mental influence known as fascination and that known as hypnotic influence. In the manifestation known as fascination, the influence is exerted solely by thought waves passing from one mind to another without a physical medium or channel other than the ether. In hypnotic influence, on the contrary, the influence is heightened by means of passive strokings or eye influence. In hypnotic influence, the mind of the person affected, whom we shall call the subject, is rendered passive by a flow of mental energy calculated to render it more or less drowsy or sleepy, and therefore less calculated to set up powers of resistance to the thought waves of the person using the influence. But the power employed is the same in all cases, no matter whether they fall under the classification of fascination or whether that of hypnotic influence. The two classes of manifestation, as a matter of fact, really blend into each other, and it is difficult to draw a dividing line in some cases. Hypnotic influence is a form of that which was formerly termed mesmerism, which name was given to it in honor of its discoverer, Frederick Anton Mesmer, who practiced this form of mental influence during the latter half of the 18th century. As a fact, however, the force in its use was known to the ancients centuries before Mesmer's time, the latter person having merely rediscovered it. Mesmer taught that the power was based upon the presence of a strange universal fluid which pervaded everything, and which had a peculiar effect upon the nerves and the brains of people. He and his followers believed that it was necessary to put the subjects into a sound sleep before they could be influenced. Now, both of these ideas have given way to the new theories on the subject now held by investigators and students of the subject. It is now known that the magnetic fluid believed in by Mesmer and his followers is nothing else than the currents of thought waves emanating from the mind of the operator. It is also now known that the deep sleep condition is not necessary to render the will of the subject subservient to that of the operator. It is also now known that the nerves of the arms and fingers afford a highly sensitive conductor for the mental currents which may be propelled over them to the mind of the subject or to his nerves and muscles. This fact is explained by the well-known scientific fact that the material of which the nerves are composed is almost identical with that of the brain. In fact, the nervous system may be spoken of as a continuation of the brain itself. It is also now known that the eye has a peculiar property of transmitting the mental currents along the rays of light entering it, and from thence to the eyes of the other person. The above fact explains the phenomena of hypnotic influence as it is now known to science. The question of suggestion also has a bearing on the subject, as we shall see presently. Modern operators do not produce the deep sleep condition, usually, except in cases when it is desired to produce some form of psychic phenomena apart from the subject of mental influence. That is, in which they are merely inducing the deep hypnotic condition in order to get the subject into a psychic condition, in which the phenomena mentioned may be manifested or exhibited. We won't enter into this phase of the subject in this book. It falls outside of our immediate subject. So, continuing then, the modern hypnotic operator merely induces a passive state of mind, or of nerves or muscles of the subject is sufficient to reduce the powers of resistance. And then he gives his orders or verbal suggestions, accompanied by a projection of his thought waves into the mind of the subject. In order to illustrate the subject here, we'll give you a few experiments which may be easily performed by anyone manifesting the powers of concentration and thought projection. There is, of course, a great degree in the degrees of impressionability of different persons to hypnotic influence. That is to say, difference of degrees of resistance. Some persons will interpose a strong resistance, while others will set up a very feeble resistance, which is easily beaten down by the will of the operator. In the following experiments, you will be best off to begin by getting some person who is perfectly willing for the experiment and who will not interpose a resistance, but who is willing to become passive. Some person friendly to you and interested in the experiments, we mean. Begin by having the person stand before you, then make sweeping passes in front of the person from head to foot. Then make a few passes in front of the face of the subject, then along his arms. Then take hold of his hands and hold them a little while, looking him straight in the eyes. Make all passes downward. Avoid levity or laughter and maintain a serious, earnest expression and frame of mind. Then, standing in front of the subject, tell him to take his will off of his legs and to stand perfectly passive and relaxed. Then, looking him straight in the eyes, say to him, "Now, I am going to draw you forward toward me by my mental power. You will feel yourself falling forward toward me. Don't resist, but let yourself come toward me. I will catch you. Don't be afraid. Now come. 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 Now you're coming. This way. Coming. Here. You're coming. That's right. That's right." And so on. You will find that he will begin to sway towards you and in a moment or two will fall forward in your arms. It is unnecessary to say that you should concentrate your mind steadily upon the idea of his falling forward, using your will firmly to that effect. It will help matters if you hold your hands on each side of his head, but just in front of him, not touching him however. And then draw away your hands towards yourself, saying at the same time, come now, come, you're coming, and so on. This experiment may be reversed by standing behind the subject and drawing him backward. Be sure and catch him in your arms when he falls. Protect him from a fall to the floor. In the same manner, you may fasten his hands together, telling him that he cannot draw them apart. Or you may start him revolving his hands and then giving him orders that he cannot stop them. Or you may draw him all around the room after you, following your finger that you have pointed at his nose. Or you may make him experience a feeling of heat and pain by touching your finger to his hand and telling him that it's hot. All of the familiar, simple experiments may be performed successfully upon a large percentage of persons in this way by following these above general directions. We shall not go into detail of the higher experiments in hypnotism, as that forms a special subject by itself. We give the above experiments here merely for the purpose of showing you that the phenomena of hypnotic influence does not require any magnetic fluid theory. It's all explainable upon the hypothesis of mental influence by means of thought waves and mental induction. Now, in these above experiments, be sure you take off the influence afterward by making upward passes and willing that the influence pass off. Do not neglect this. In your experiments, if you care to undertake them, you will soon discover the power of your eye upon the other persons. You will be able to almost feel the force passing from your gaze to theirs. And this is true in the case of the passes and strokings of the hands. You will feel the vibratory waves flowing from your hands into their nervous systems. It is wonderful what power is aroused in a person after conducting a few experiments along these lines. Those who care to follow the subject further are referred to a forthcoming book of this series to be issued shortly, and which will be called The New Hypnotism, in which full instructions will be given in the higher phenomena in complete detail. Now a word of warning. Beware of people who are always putting their hands on you, or patting or stroking you, or wishing to hold your hands a long time. Many persons do this from force of habit and innocently, but others do so with the intention of producing a mild form of hypnotic influence upon you. If you meet such persons and find them attempting anything of this sort, you can counteract their influence by sending them a strong thought current, as stated in our last chapter. Sending them the thought, you can't affect me. I am too strong for you. You can't play your tricks on me. It's a good plan to practice this counteracting force when you are shaking hands with a magnetic person who seems to affect people. You will soon be able to distinguish these people by a certain force about them and a peculiar expression in their eyes. Do not be afraid to look them in their eyes at the same time using your protective will upon them. Caution, young girls, against allowing young men, to be too free in using their hands and caressing them. And a word of advice to young men of your family would not be out of place in this respect. There are many cases of sex attraction leading to very deplorable results arising from a conscious or unconscious use of this simple form of hypnotic influence. The danger lies in the fact that it renders one passive to other influences and more readily led into temptation and to yield to the desires or will of the other person. A word to the wise would be sufficient. The use of this power for immoral purposes is a terrible crime and brings down upon the user deplorable results, as all occultists know and teach. Everyone should learn to resist such influences when exerted upon them. Forewarned is forearmed. Chapter 8 will be influencing at a distance, and will cover exerting mental influence upon others at a distance, how the mental currents flow to a distance, how distant treatments are given, the occult practices are given, a number of the more effective methods are given, with particulars of practice. That chapter will begin with, in the two preceding chapters, we invited your consideration of the manifestation of mental influence when the user or projector of the force was in actual contact with or in the presence of the person or persons he was aiming to influence. In this chapter, and the one immediately following it, we shall pass to a consideration of the manifestation of the influence when the persons affected are removed in space from the person using the influence. But that's for the next video. Again, if you haven't yet subscribed to this chapter, then please do so and activate the notification bell feature while you're at it. Comment courteously below. If you like the video, please remember to give it a thumb up. Share the joy of the channel with others. See you in the next video.